very much. Moving to item 4.2, Council Advisory Committees. Mr. Stewart, would you like to make some opening comments?
For many years, Council has appointed a variety of committees, and in 2000 we formalized in many cases, the structures and the processes with respect to those committees. With the introduction of the community charter, certainly a significant amount of support became necessary to those committees to meet the requirements of the charter. And in 2006, Council identified a number of areas where they wanted to see some change for the better. And in fact, what we had been hearing from not only Council but members of our advisory committees is that there were some concerns with respect to how effective those committees were with respect to Council's decision-making processes. So a decision was made to in fact look at 16 of our advisory committees, and they're outlined on page 2. When Council authorized that, staff then met with those committees and their chairs and asked for their comments in terms of what changes they would like to see. And some of the observations that came out of that review process was that the roles of the committees were in fact very diverse, and so the structure was in many cases not meeting their needs. There was a suggestion that there needed to be an opportunity to participate and provide input on Council issues and decisions, but that there needs to be a less rigid framework. There was some frustration expressed with respect to just the communication processes, and also that the administrative processes that the committees had to undergo in order to function were quite cumbersome, again relating to the charter. There was also some suggestions, in fact, that the processes themselves and the membership really need to look at for all of the committees. So after taking into consideration that advice, it's our recommendation that in fact we go to a system that involves, I'll describe it as 5 categories. Those are found on page 3, and I'll just quickly go through them. They are advisory forums, working groups, community advisory groups, special task forces, and standing advisory committees. And I'll try to provide a very brief example of what those different categories encompass. With respect to the forums, they really, rather than talking about appointing structured committees, this represents an opportunity to engage a much broader cross-section of the community on Council issues of interest to Council. And essentially, we would try to take advantage of the use of technology to do that. Members of the public could register to be a member of the forum, and then they would have an opportunity on an ongoing basis throughout the year to in fact go to a website or pick up material at a library, review that material, and then provide their input. In some cases, specific dialogues and groups will be formed to actually look at a particular issue and provide some recommendations and input to staff and Council. The working groups in some ways are similar to the advisory committees, but in this case there's not as much structure attached to them, and they're more focused on particular issues that have come up. With respect to the community advisory groups, we're really, in this instance, trying to tap into existing groups that are in fact providing to us advice on an ongoing basis. And these, in some cases, are groups that are organized, self-organized out in the community, and they could be ratepayer associations, groups like the Senior Centers Advisory Committee, the Museum and Archives Advisory Committee, field user groups. There's a lot of these people that we consult with now, and it really is just trying to recognize them as a special category that we would engage on an ongoing basis with respect to particular issues. The 4th category is special task forces, and this would contemplate Council, in fact, appointing high-profile task forces where you have an issue that you would like them to look at, and I'll give an example of the Fiscal Sustainability Task Force as an example where Council is deliberately chosen rather than perhaps a lower-profile working group, something that has stature in the community and reports directly back to Council. With respect to the standing advisory committees, these are committees in some cases that are in operation now, and we're recommending that they continue. They provide an ongoing advice to Council. These include the Design Review Committee, and the Finance and Audit Committee, and we're suggesting, in fact, also that we add one, and that's called an appointment committee, so that Council of the Whole doesn't have to be involved in actually appointing members to working groups, but a small subsection of Council could do that, because, again, this allows us to be quite a bit more flexible than the current structure that we have right now. Working groups that could be appointed include issues such as the Heritage Strategy implementation, the Youth Strategy implementation, the Foreshore Strategy implementation, Arts and Cultural Strategy implementation. So there's a lot of things where Council has set the policy, but you might want a working group, for example, to assist staff in going through the process of implementing that policy. The approach that, and in the report, we've actually gone through all 16 and tried to provide Council with a sense of where we think they would fit into those particular categories. There's a fair bit of work if Council is comfortable with this new approach in terms of working out things like specific terms of reference and membership and that kind of thing. So we're suggesting, in fact, that the recommendations would take effect September 1. That would give us the next month and a half to work out some of the details. We would anticipate coming back to Council in the middle of September with a report that had it all sort of put together for you to pass specific appointments, that kind of thing. And if I could just conclude, I think in a lot of ways this is a pretty radical departure from what we've done in the past. There's no question about it. But I think it's a change. It would seem that the committees and Council and the community are looking for. Certainly from the feedback that we got, the volunteers have had a rich history in West Vancouver of providing Council with expertise that would be very expensive if we'd gone out and tried to obtain it. And that expertise and that advice has always been appreciated. And if there's one thing we heard is that we would, from the committees and from those who are involved in providing advice to Council, they really would like to participate, but on a more focused basis, or alternatively, they'd like to participate in a less formal process in terms of providing ongoing input. So this is an attempt to meet both of those needs, and at the same time lowering some of the resource requirements that the current structure requires. And so we're hoping that this is going to represent really a very different way of engaging the community and obtaining advice. And we would anticipate that we would probably run with this for a year and then report back to Council as to whether or not it was working or not, much in the same way as we've done with our advisory committees of periodically reviewing them.
Thank you. Council, before we ask questions and get into our discussion, I've got one member of the public that wishes to speak. So I'd like to invite Caroline Reynolds at this time.
Thank you, Mayor. The chair is too far away. Thank you. This is an exciting change, and it's really great to see all the ideas in this. My one comment would be that it says implement September 1st, and I thought perhaps you might want to consider circulating these ideas to the community, to the former committee members who will be involved in this in September, and to the ratepayer and senior and all those groups for their feedback, perhaps come back September 1st so that and by then you would have had the terms of reference, I understand, that have not been worked out yet, so that you could consider I think this is the first time we've seen this proposal. So I thought perhaps it would benefit from people who've been in the system and attended meetings, participated in meetings, been on committees, to have their opinions included in your consideration. I know that all the committees were asked what they thought to provide suggestions, as the Chief Administrator Officer said, but they have not seen the outcome yet. And I think it would be valuable, they're really good ideas, but to just say take this and start September 1st is a little bit of a rusher without even seeing the terms of reference. So my suggestion would be, and there were many good ideas in the report, please don't get me wrong, but I think it would benefit in your commitment to openness and participation that these new ideas be circulated to former members of committees, to the ratepayer groups, and those people you want to engage for comment. They'll probably come back, most of them say, this is great, but I just think it would be very good from the point of view of openness and participation to have the feedback before saying you're just implementing this September 1st.
Thank you.
Do you think that might be possible?
Well, we'll have a council discussion, Mr. Stewart.
I was going to mention, we have, in fact, discussed in general terms the direction that we were going with many of the committees, and in particular, there were a couple of committees that had expressed some reservations, and in those particular instances, the mayor and I actually spent some time with those particular committees. But it's up to the council as whether they want to go through the loop one more time.
Yes, I didn't mean to imply that they made plain. I know that they were consulted, but I don't think the public has been yet either, or a general thing. I mean, it could be, if you want to do it September 1st, maybe just say we have to report by the last meeting in July or something so that it hastens that, we don't delay it. But I really do think that it would be at least a courtesy to get the feedback from the public. Thank you.
Shall we put the motion on the floor, or are these questions for Mr. Stewart first?
Put the motion on the floor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Vaughan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that the recommendations regarding Council Advisory Committees contained in the Chief Administrative Officer's July 5th, 2006 report be approved for implementation September 1st, 2006.
Second.
Thank you. Councillor Savage.
Madam Mayor, I want to say that I think this is a very positive, forward-moving report. Although I share some concerns with Mr. Stewart, and I want to ask him, number one, the previous way, in my view, didn't work. So we're adopting a new approach, and I'm just wondering, in this new approach, where is the communication linkages that is going to better the openness between council, these committees, and the reporting method that will be used to bring about information to this council on a need-to-know basis ongoing. That's point number one. Secondly, I would assume that all working groups and or meetings would be open to all councillors at any time. Thirdly, I have some concerns about putting the design panel in a committee form that would see the group, quote, be appointed annually and are the members going to be professionals, architects, landscapes? How many would there be? The reason I say this is we pride ourselves in this community on the character of this community and the design motif that we've developed over the years, and when you open up this particular avenue to a committee, how do we get a sense of information back that is going to be on an ongoing basis when so many come to a design panel? Sure. I might say, Madam Mayor, that the same might apply to planning, although I see there's different initiatives. If there are going to be committees that are going to look at initiatives, sometimes or timely initiatives, what happens the rest of the time? Who does all that other work then? When does it get in front of us?
Mr. Stewart.
I think the communication processes have to be looked at. I think they're going to differ by category, and that's some of the sort of the details that we've got to work out. With respect to attendance at working groups, again, those are the kind of terms of reference issues that we've got to make sure we've got spec'd out. Certainly in our current council procedure bylaw, there's the opportunity for council members to come in and observe any of the current advisory committees. So I don't see that changing. I see council having the opportunity to participate in the working groups. But communication will differ depending on whether it's a working group or a task force. So we can provide a framework for that. With respect to the design advisory committee, we're not changing that at all. All we're saying is leave the membership as is in terms of numbers, but you may want to ensure that some of those categories that are already identified within the current structure adequately represent sort of the sustainability theme. And so I think there's some really minor tweaking that's going to occur there. More to the point, I think there are some opportunities to improve the way projects are referred to that group, and the way they report back to council, and that's included in the recommendations. So it's not so much changing the purpose, function, size, membership, so much as looking at ways to just improve the way that in fact they get access to different kinds of projects and provide the timely reviews and then provide that information back to council.
And just a second follow-up here. The appointment committee would make the recommendations to council on the appointees to all the committees?
The appointment committee would deal with working groups. If council was considering appointing us either a standing committee or a task force, that would be something that all of council would be involved in.
So council will not have the right to appoint all people to all groups?
No, I think we would have to work out a process where council was advised of the intentions of the appointment committee in terms of the appointments of the working groups. But if you have council approving and actually formally appointing the working groups, then they fall back under the council procedure bylaw, and we're really no further ahead than we are right now with the cumbersome processes that we have to follow with the advisory committees.
Well, I disagree a little with that. What was lacking was communication skills somewhere along the line. I don't say staff or anybody, but we were not getting the response of the previous method. My point is this. If the control of appointing people on committees is taken away from the council, we lose control of that committee in many, many ways. First, it gets caught up in the bureaucracy. And in doing so, are there associated costs for consultants, for a position, for new ideas? It happened in the last one that there was work plans, and the work plans, in some cases, made the staff scratch their heads as, where are the funds for this? Where am I going to get the money? And I just feel that I don't want the process softened down so much as I want the communication skills built a little better. And I said from the outset that I like what you've put down here, but I think we'd have to be very cautious in our intent here with 5 different groups of committees and whether it gets away on us. And I'm just cautioning that we had better, in these next few months before this is implemented, have these questions answered.
Thank you, Councillor Salvage. Councillor Ferguson, then Councillor Day, Councillor Vaughan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is an interesting, I think, and complex report. 7 years ago, sitting here, the Council of the Day determined that the advisory committee process wasn't working. The advisory committees weren't happy with the process. The Council of the Day seemed unhappy with the process. And so Councillor Haycock spearheaded a group that sat down and took a look at the advisory committees, what was going wrong, what would work better, and came back with a whole series of recommendations. We set new committee process into place and operated for the remainder of the next 2 terms of office, and there was always a lot of grumbling. And interestingly, I'm not sure that the grumbling had much to do with the actual process of the committees, aside from the fact that they did seem to generate a huge amount of work for staff that sometimes was difficult to fit into their regular workday. But I think one of the real bones of contention was that council didn't always take the advice of their committees straight out. They actually sometimes had to consider advice from other committees, which contradicted the advice from the first committee, and they also had to consider the political ramifications, the economic ramifications, and the community social ramifications of all the advice that they were given. And so there was always some concern by the committees that their work wasn't appreciated, when in fact the committees worked really hard. They did a very, very good job for council, and council was extremely appreciative of the hours, the skill, the expertise, and the advice that they were given. But they did have to use it within the context of the larger the larger picture and community decision. And so I look at this and I see a lot in here, actually, that was employed by the council of the last two councils on which I served at various times and under various guises. A lot of it was used during our official community plan. We had what you might consider community advisory forums. We also had advisory groups where all the sort of registered groups, ratepayers groups, et cetera, were called into large venues and spent an evening workshopping together at small tables. And so all of these have been used. I think all of these suggestions have been used at different times and in different places and in different ways by council over the last probably 50 years. I don't know. Whether we'll be any more satisfied with this, both the groups and the council, remains to be seen, but I think we need to consider some changes and we need to find ways that will work better for our community. I have a lot of questions about the terms of reference and the clarity of those terms of reference, and I have a lot of questions about how public these meetings are going to be. What role does the public play? The public was always an observer at advisory committee meetings. They could ask questions of process and disposition at the end of the meeting. Will the public have a different role? Will all the meetings be public? Will they be in camera? How will we communicate afterwards? Will there be minutes? Will there be no minutes? Will people know what went on at these meetings? So as I say, I have lots of questions, most of them around the terms of reference and the mandates for these committees and the process, and I'm looking forward and hoping that staff will have some ability to have these terms of reference in place so that we can consider them before we put the thing put the changes into working.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
Well, Madam Mayor, this is very complicated, and it's much more expensive than I had foreseen. And I'm particularly concerned about the September 1 deadline because a lot of people are going to be taken by surprise when after the August break they suddenly find they're not on an advisory committee anymore. I would point out that unless I'm misreading this, Community Advisory Forum isn't really an advisory committee. They're really electronic forums in which people are invited to express their views by the electronic media on a variety of broad topics, probably meaningless in those cases. And essentially what this does is abolish almost all of our advisory committees: engineering, finance, youth, parks and environment, heritage, community services, arts and culture, and the planning committee. They disappear. They're not going to meet anymore. These committees have played a major role in West Vancouver affairs over the years. The number of people we have volunteering for these committees alone indicates the interest in them. We can't find places on our committees to meet the demand that people have to volunteer on them, to sit on them. And secondly, these committees have served as a means of recruitment to public life in this community. Many of us in the council presently and in the past sat on these committees and gained experience in public life by our experience on these advisory committees. And essentially what replaces these is working groups, but the working groups are really implementation committees. And I would simply point out that something like Heritage Strategy Implementation was there to implement the ideas of the Heritage Committee. Do away with the Heritage Committee, you're not going to have the ideas, except in a very broad electronic way. And I can't really see what that's going to mean. Foreshore Strategy Implementation, the Engineering Advisory Committee came up with excellent ideas on the foreshore. Without that committee, we wouldn't have had the ideas that Adrian Rowland and other people came forward with. Also on the whole downhill trucking issue, the Engineering Committee played a major role in helping to advise council on how to improve its regulations on control of downhill truck traffic. I don't see that these forums, these electronic forums on broad topics, will replace these committees. I'm glad to see the Design Advisory Committee survives, but that's really the only one that does. Now, community advisory groups, these groups exist already, such as the Western Residents Association, Ambleside and Dunderray Ratepayers Association, just giving them a different name. Finally, the only really meaningful groups would be the special task forces, but these would be named for specific purposes. They would have some value, I think, probably the only ones that would really have any direct value. and it's hard to know what form they would take exactly. Finally, 2 or 3 standing advisory committees survive, but it's really only the design review committee that does, and partially the finance committee. The appointments committee simply dealt with naming people to the various committees. If we do away with most of the committees, that advisory committee on naming or recommending people to the committees isn't going to have very much to do. Finally, I'm glad to see the design review committee survives, but we need to state more clearly who its members would be and what its duties would be. It says here, substantive development projects. Oh boy, substantive. Would that do away with duplexes? Would the design panel be able to render opinions or views or recommendations on duplexes? I would argue that the improvements in design over the years have come directly from duplexes on up to high-rise buildings. If you take away their power over duplexes, I'm not sure you are, but it doesn't say. If it says substantive, does that mean important, major? Does that do with duplexes? If you look around, duplexes are generally a much better design than our single-family homes because the design panel kicks in on duplexes on up. It doesn't have any control over single-family zones. Single-family homes, which go to the building department. So again, these are questions. September 1st, we're going to tell the planning committee it doesn't exist anymore? That there's going to be electronic media that are going to replace it? No. I think essentially what we have to do is put this off to the end of the year, and we've got to discuss these things with the committees themselves. The Planning Committee, Heritage, Parks and Recreation, and so forth. The committees have been around for years. And so we've got really, I think we should wait till the end of 2006, discuss these things carefully with the committees and with the public before we make, I think, a radical move in passing this legislation here.
Thank you. Councillor Vaughan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I really think we do have to congratulate Mr. Stewart for tackling this difficult subject and bringing some order to it, and actually having the courage to move forward with the electronic age. And I think taking seriously that we do need some cost efficiencies in staff time, that I'm afraid I can't agree with my colleague Councillor Day saying that we have to be very careful and slow about it. I think the whole point is here, we're facing the fact that we don't have financial sustainability. We're looking for ways to make savings, and we are looking to make these committees work better and give us better value for money. So I wonder if I can ask a question, if Mr. Stewart is able to tell us item on financial implications, saying that we will get savings in meetings costs and better value for resources invested, but we have no numbers. What did the meetings cost under the scheme we've had, and what savings will we get when this new scheme is implemented? Because that really is one of the leading reasons to do it.
Perhaps, Madam Mayor, I could answer a number of issues that were raised. One is with respect to the Standing Advisory Committee of the Appointment Committee. That's for appointing working groups, as I mentioned to Councillor Soprovich. So anticipating that we will have a number of working groups, there will be a fair bit of work there. With respect to the working groups, I've just named some of the rather obvious ones that I'm aware of, but that doesn't prevent working groups being formed to actually address particular issues. And in fact, in many of the cases, some of the issues that you see there in terms of implementation were actually developed by subcommittees of the advisory committee. What we're saying here is let's move away from advisory committees that just meet and wait for something to come up. And in fact, when the issue comes up, forming the group together, tackling the particular issue, and then providing those recommendations to council, and then that group can stand down. So certainly they'll have the opportunity to take a look at issues. As it stands right now, you don't have any advisory committees. Their terms are all extended only to June 30th. So at this point, you really have, with the exception of the Design Review Committee and the Finance and Audit Committee, those are your two committees. Now, certainly, if Council wants to have some more discussion with the committees about these recommendations, we can do that informally or formally during the balance of the year. But there is real opportunities here, I think, to move forward. But again, whether it's September 1, maybe it's September 30th. I would welcome the opportunity and anticipated that if in fact Council approved this, that we would go out to these groups and let them know what was happening, and then in fact ask them what are some issues that they think ought to be tackled, either through the forums or the working groups, so that we could start to tackle those, in fact, this fall.
Well, that answer your question, Councillor Ron?
I haven't answered that last question. And it's really difficult for me to actually quantify that. I could probably provide council with a rough estimate about the number of hours and some of the, I'll call them the sort of out-of-pocket costs, such as, dinners and coffeeing and that kind of thing. To suggest, in fact, that we're going to have savings that will result in budget reductions, I don't know that so much is going to happen as we'll see reallocation of resources. But certainly we won't see resources being spent on bureaucracy and administrative processes so much as actually on focusing on work, which is, I think, that's the message that we heard from the advisory committees. We want to do some work. We don't want to just meet for the sake of meeting.
Do you have anything further?
I just wanted to, I wonder if I may comment that I appreciated the comments made by Ms. Reynolds about consulting the public, but I wonder also if in doing that we could make the point that part of this is for efficiency and savings, that it's very easy for the public to make suggestions for good things to do, but if they're going to be expensive, I don't think that will be very helpful with this exercise. We're really looking for getting very focused and very efficient, and I'm hoping we will get some savings, because if not, we're going to be doing the exercise again a year from now, I would hope. Thank you.
You're welcome. Councillor Smith.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I have to admit I'm kind of split on this, because I think Councillor Day makes some good points. These committees have been around for a long time, and I guess I'm struggling with what's the difference between having a heritage committee and having a heritage working group for example, heritage strategy implementation. Why would you not keep your heritage committee, and if the certain numbers of the committee members wanted to break off into working groups, it would seem that would be a logical way to go. And same, you could make the same point about engineering and parks and environment. The other thing that troubles me a bit is this appointments committee. Why would you have an appointment committee to appoint people? Wouldn't that be the role of council, to appoint people to these committees? I just question why we would have to have a subcommittee, an appointments committee to appoint people. If they're going to be brought before council anyway, the names, seems that it would just be logical to have council deal with appointments as vacancies occur. So on the one hand, I support Mr. Stewart's initiative to make the committees more focused and have more target-oriented working groups, but I also concur, I think, with Alderman Day or Councillor Day, Alderperson Day, that these committees are part of the long-standing tradition of West End. I served on the Community Services Advisory Commission and the Parks and Rec Commission at the time. That's sort of my initiation into local West Vancouver politics, and as of many others. So I think just to strike them off the roster with, so quickly, I think, without really thinking the thing through, I think might come back to be a bit of a negative move.
The difference between just a standing committee and what we did in the last restructuring and review is in order to address some issues that council had with respect to how they decide on what it is they're going to do, how often they're going to meet, is create a very formal structure that involves in posting of agendas and the creation of minutes and the creation of work plans and the feedback to council on what the work plans had been, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in a lot of ways, it was the care and feeding of the committees that took over as opposed to actually getting the work, important issues tackled. And all we're suggesting here is, for example, the Heritage Committee. Well, if council has now passed the Heritage policy, and there's a huge amount of work involved with that, why not focus the group? And I mean, the Heritage Committee, for all intents and purposes, could be reappointed as a working group. Let's focus them on implementing that Heritage Committee as opposed to a general committee that's meeting monthly just to talk about heritage, unless there are other heritage issues that come up. So it's really a question of focusing the groups. And you're quite correct. There's not probably a huge difference between a working group and an advisory group, other than the fact that A, they're likely to be more focused, and B, we're likely not to have as much formal structure requiring the support in order to make those work. You might find that a heritage, and I keep using that one, but it could apply elsewhere, that a heritage implementation strategy working group only had to meet once every 2 months or 3 months, because they're not charged with actually doing the implementation so much as overseeing what council has approved and providing staff with some guidance as they work through the implementation process. So it's a much more focused group. The foreshore implementation strategy group, and in fact, Mr. Jenkins is here. That group has already talked about forming their own society. They may not even want to be a working group. And that's the kind of thing that we're trying to capture in the community, where there's these groups that are able to, in fact, they form of their own volition with their own interests and their own agenda and tapping into those resources, as opposed to creating advisory committees.
I've got Councillor Day and Councillor Salvage for the second time. So, Councillor Clark, would you like to say anything?
No, I'm good for them.
Okay. Councillor Day.
The problem with the special task force, essentially forget about the community advisory forums. We haven't got the staff to collate all the material that's going to come in on email. Councillor Vaughan thinks that's going to save us money, but I got news for you. Unless you're in a position to establish specific topics that people can comment on, you're not going to get much that's worthwhile coming in on the media, especially with broad topics. So forget that. That's just not going to work, because we haven't got the staff, we haven't got the time to deal with all kinds of sort of electronic material, which isn't well focused in terms of definition and so forth. That may be the odd thing that works, but generally it won't. So essentially what we're saying is that we're replacing the advisory committees with task forces, which will deal with more specific material, which in fact could have an advantage. The problem is, well, let me put it another way. The advantage to the advisory committees was that it brought together generally very talented people, people often with professional expertise and knowledge and background, to talk about issues that council referred to a given committee. Sometimes they did well, sometimes they didn't do so well. But what we have here were people of great ability for the most part, and great expertise, who provided us all kinds of knowledge free of charge. Now, if that wasn't a good deal, that isn't a good deal. All we had to do was give them an annual dinner, and we got all that input. We wouldn't have had heritage implementation, or arts and culture, or foreshore, if we hadn't had those bright people to come up with those ideas that get referred to special task forces. Okay? But by the time you get to the special task force, it's too late. You've got to have the input that we councillors don't have, because we can't specialize in enough things. So you need those bright people to come up with ideas that get you going, and then you create a special task force. And so what we're doing is we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater here, and that's the mistake we're making. What we should do is give something, for example, a planning commission. The planning committee hasn't had enough work. I think it's because the two previous councils didn't care very much about the advisory committees, and they imposed all kinds of bureaucratic regulations on them in 2001 and didn't refer enough material to them. So the planning committee, for example, complains it doesn't get enough work. There's a simple answer to that. Give them work. Council should give them work more than it does. There are all kinds of things going on, the upper lands and so forth, that these very bright people in the planning committee could be advising us on. But we don't give them the work. And so we say, they complain about not having enough work to do, abolish the committee. What a mistake that is. Give them work to do. That's going to be a lot more effective than electronic forums on broad topics that are ill-defined. So, again, I think we've gone too far here. I appreciate the motives. They're well-intentioned, but I think we're making a major mistake in doing away with our major committees. We should reform them, change them, give them more work to do. We shouldn't do away with the committees.
Okay, Savage. I'm sorry.
I just need to make a clarification, just so that Councillor Day's clear on the forum issue. I think you established the forums on a broad topic, such as planning. But the idea is to put specific issues with backup material to the forums for comment. So it's not just to have forums on a broad issue. It's actually to say, well, we're looking at this particular issue. There's a discussion paper that's available on the web. What are your thoughts and comments on it? So that the opportunity for people to provide input is not just limited to 11 with expertise that meet once a month, but a broad representation of the community who also have expertise that can't get on that committee, who might have some thoughts and views. And right now, the opportunity for the advisory committees actually to consult with the public on issues such as that is very, very restricted.
Madam Mayor, if I could just reply to that. You could do that without abolishing the advisory committee. We can have electronic input from people. I'm not opposed to that. I think that could be useful if we defined our terms. I was upset with the term broad topics. But what I wonder is who's going to collate that material? I mean, again, one of the arguments was we'll save staff time. But if staff has to collate all that material, that's not going to save time. That's probably going to take more time and counsel as well. So again, I think we need to work that out better, really. I'm not opposed to getting people's opinions, but I think we could keep the committees and give them the benefit of people's opinions.
Councilor Savage.
Well, I think in workshops we all on this council had advised staff that we were not happy with the way the advisory committees were, or the committees that we had set up. They once were called commissions, which were really, if they called a commission under the community charter, they were set apart. I think the day was lost when we changed to committee. Because the independence of a commission has more value to the community as a whole than, say, a working group and others. But we opted to look at a new road, which Mr. Stewart has brought before us, because the reporting system really wasn't working. And Councillor Day is right. We did not send or ask for advice. In very few cases did we ever send or ask for advice from Heritage, Parks and Rec, or Engineering. Planning and maybe design got most of it. And then the reporting system. No fault. I'm not critiquing anybody here, but a reporting system of minutes, which were not word for word, which were sometimes, because of a system, weren't present in front of us for 2-3 months later. That is not a good system for a need to know by this elected group about what's going on in the community in specific areas. Now, we were appointed as liaison to the different committees, and I think council as a whole, any councillor could go sit in the audience and listen to what's going on to be informed. But council was not asked on this agenda or any time in the past to report on what he or she heard during that time that they sat as a liaison. So the reporting and the communication links were lost. I sat on a few committees. In fact, over the years, I've sat on every one of them. But I always favored Parks and Rec because they were a feisty group, and although they weren't supposed to advocate, they did. And they came up with some good reports. But the offshoot of that was that new societies or others were starting to kick in and give more advice than we had in the past. And I think that was where we started to see some great value in these different groups within the community that were meaningful, and they were societies, one from another. I think of Stream Keepers as one, and Friends of Cyprus as another. The Initiative on the Foreshore is another society. These are going to be well-intended people with a lot of knowledge, and they, because of the society, they will foster more information than we'd ever could anticipate. And my only concern that I have is that, like, I know the concern of Councillor Day is that we shouldn't have done away with them, but this is a new direction, new road. I think it would be important to let it run for a year. I don't want, in my mind, to lose the ability of these great people in this community who give their valued information to us and help us. I don't want that ever to be lost, but at the same time, the old system just wasn't there, and I think it's time for change. And if we go cautiously, I think that we can come up with some new direction here, and it will be, I think, extremely valuable to us in some of the initiatives we have going before us. I sat with a lot of committees, and I know the intensity and the flavor that they want to do something. So I'm not dispelling what Councillor Day has said, but I think we have to go in a new direction, and I would like that we, I guess for the next few months before this is implemented, to have a good hard look at some of these questions that have been asked tonight, and maybe inform us in more detail before that happens.
All right. I have Councillor Ferguson and Vaughan to speak a second time, but Councillor Clark I'm going to allow to interject here as he hasn't spoken yet. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Somebody once said a long time ago that the times they are a-changing. It might have been a little Abner, I'm not sure who it was, but...
Bob Dylan?
Bob Dylan? No, he's close. My next guest. I think we view the world differently today. We have technology available to us that wasn't even around 3 or 4 years ago. Over the past half dozen years, the past two councils have recognized that there were situations and problems, whatever you want to call them, with the system that we were using, and there were changes made on a trial basis. Some of those attempts and changes did work, and others didn't. I think we've reached the next level of decision making, whereby we should be looking to bring this whole process up to date. I think reading through this report, I think 3 times now, I think the manager has done a stellar job. He's fluent with the process. He knows the internal workings of this organization. The costs of having staff on call 24/7 almost for some of these committees, even if the committees don't meet, and some of them didn't meet for several months last year, but the staff is still there, and the paperwork still, for some reason, tends to grind on through. I hear what Councillor Day is saying, and I respect every word that he uttered, but I still think that it's time that we try. We're not putting something in stone. There's nothing life-threatening here. We can change it again if so be it. As far as the people in this community goes, I know darn well that they are all Keeners, as we are, and they'll be there when we ask, because they're part of this whole process. So I look forward to it, and I'm supporting it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. As I said before, I do have some concerns, and I share some of Councillor Day's concerns, and I also agree with Councillor Smith when he was commenting on his first appearances on advisory committees years ago as a school trustee, and I as well. And it does, when you do have that opportunity, it does broaden, I think, your horizons in terms of the community. I think it allows an opportunity to learn leadership skills, to learn compromise. Everyone has very definite opinions about their community, their neighborhood, their house, their street. But when they talk to others in the community, they find that in order to coexist, they often have to compromise their opinions and reach a consensus. And so I don't see that we will lose any of those things by what's being proposed here, dependent upon the terms of reference, reporting processes, and not that we need to run around singing Bob Dylan songs, but we can do this, and we can make it work for us, and we can make it work for the community. I think that we can give this a try. If it doesn't work, then in a year we'll know, and we can revert back to something different, or find an alternative, or fine-tune what was in place. I think September 1 is a little too early. I think Ms. Reynolds had a good point. I think September 30th might be more realistic, but I think if we could have the terms of reference and the mandates for these specific groups by September 1 so that we have a better idea of what we can expect, then we have an opportunity to make some changes that may in fact improve things and make people more comfortable with the transition.
Councillor Vaughan.
Thank you. I have been thinking about what Councillor Day has said, that basically volunteers got together and some really very capable people put forward some really good ideas, and that there was a kind of a synergy, and there was a dinner, I think, once a year or something along those lines, and that in that way it worked. But the comment that puzzles me was the implication that if you ask those same people for those same bright ideas to simply put them on an email, the sense that they wouldn't do it. And I'm surprised at that. I think they would do it. I think bright people know that the modern working world uses the email, and I can see no reason why people who have input such emails should not, once per quarter year, per half year, be invited to a dinner. I mean, I don't think electronic technology precludes dinners. So, I do think our informatics, our computer people could tell us how they would handle the influx of email. I doubt that there would be hundreds of them. I think maybe a few dozen on an important topic. But we could get a report on that. That's part of the experimental time period to see whether, in fact, it's not bad, and that the number of emails on interesting topics actually turns out to be quite manageable. So, with respect to the comments Councillor Day made, I think we can solve these issues, and that we definitely should give this a try. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to make a few comments, if that's all right, because I hear the respect that Councillor Day and others have for decades of advisory work that leaders and obviously talented people in the community have offered West Vancouver and made it what it is. And what this report, I think, does is build on that, because the kinds of comments we had right across the bar from our advisory committees were that they wish to be assigned specific tasks. They want to roll up their sleeves and work. They'd like to be focused on policy-related tasks earlier in the process rather than as a more of a after that things have been decided. They were very disappointed in terms of communication with council, and I think what we're saying is, come on in. This is ultimately about opening the doors wider at City Hall. I think that the forums will end up actually coalescing around a regular appointed body that meets quarterly or monthly if they're talking about, for instance, the Upper Lands, for instance, within planning. But we also wanted to say to all the groups that work in the community who sometimes have a difficult time helping us, that we rely on them too. So we rely on nonprofits, we rely on all kinds of organizations, and this sort of sends a major message to the community that your expertise and experience in the community is legitimate, because just having advisory committees, and I'm not trying to say this in a pejorative way, it's an elitist model, and we need that sometimes, but we need to go beyond that, and technology is also at the root of that, and we're not using technology, I don't think, in nearly as effective a way as we can. For sure, the other significant challenge we have is value for money that the community invests in our staff, and we have heard consistently from our staff, this is not the best use of their time. It's the community charter and our onerous procedure bylaw have really atrophied some of the best we've got in the community, and including some of our best staff. So this will evolve, and I don't think we want to, abolish is a strong word. I think we want to work with this, and perhaps what needs to come back for September the 1st would be further defined terms of reference. Further ways, because I think we do want to implement this. I certainly do. The committees know their appointments are over. Many have had parties. The design panel is essentially intact. Planning is looking at significant work. It's actually probably going to expand because we've got the Upper Lands, we've got Ambleside, and so there's no question there's no shortage of work. And finally, the only other thing I'd like to say about the working groups is it gives us, as an organization, the ability to move quickly, to be flexible, to allow people to make major contributions in a short space of time, which is what suits people today. It's a huge commitment to show up once a month for 4 hours to do something that has little effect, and that concerns me about our reputation as a corporation, really, let alone the type of place that engages people. So I think this is really, really important. I hope it succeeds, but we're in transition. And I think ultimately it will be a centerpiece of the work that this council does to try to ultimately include the public more. And that's what the advisory committees were never intended for. It's not fair to blame them for not engaging with the public. That's not what we ever asked them to do. But in the end, the public has been a little critical of that. Mr. Stewart?
Just listening to some of the comments, if council would like me to report back before implementation, and given the fact that we may want to consult particularly the outgoing members of the committees, and we've already done that to a certain degree in terms of identification of issues, then the September 30th implementation date would allow me to report back before it's actually implemented and do that kind of canvassing. So if some member of council, if they were going to support this motion, wanted to make that kind of a friendly amendment, that may assist council in considering that.
Is that all right with the mover as a friendly amendment then?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Is there anything further?
Question?
All right, call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries with hope. Thank you very much. Excellent debate. Moving to item 4.3. We have two of these kinds of leaders with us to comment on the foreshore plan. First of all, Derek Hawkins.
Your Worship, members of Council, thank you very much. I'm Derek Hawkins at 2230 Lawson Avenue. I've been living there for 50